All right, so collage is any type of artwork that's made by collecting and assembling materials and then using some sort of adhesive or glue to attach them to a surface. So we're going to look at some different collage artists and thinking about these two questions. So how do they make collages? Literally, what materials do they use? What techniques do they use? And then how does the act of mixing images, combining images, reassembling images create new meaning in the works that they're doing? So when I look at your collage, I'm going to be looking for these things that you can experiment with collage techniques. You can come up with an idea and create a collage. So for inspiration, our first artist is Andrea Diacchino. I don't know if I'm saying her name right. So she says about her work, I use a mix of medias and have a spontaneous approach. It's often collage, but not necessarily photo-based. I draw and paint, then I cut things up and see what happens. Though being contrary by nature, I don't like to stay inside any box that is too predefined. Whenever someone calls me a collage artist, I never fail to be surprised. Really? Is that what I am? I really don't know, but maybe. You can see there's 3 of her pieces there that kind of show her style. And here's one piece I picked for us specifically to look at. So we're going to discuss this one. So take a minute to think about these questions, and then we're going to discuss as a class. Okay, what materials are you noticing? Ray?
Magazine paper.
Magazine paper, yes. What else? It's not all magazine paper. What else do we have? Alex? Yep. So there's definitely some paint. Yasmin? Yeah. So there's definitely some paper that they created this texture on with a drawing material and then cut out. Any others you're seeing? So are all of the shapes that were cut out of paper pictures? No. So they're putting together these images, creating a larger picture, but the raw materials, what they're cutting, isn't always, oh, I needed a tear, so I'm going to find a picture of a tear in a magazine. No, I'm going to find an interesting paper and cut a tear out of it. And I believe the title of this piece is Financial Stress. So sometimes you are finding the picture that you need, like the face, and sometimes you're creating the picture that you need. So what principles of design do you see in this one? You are welcome to look at your notes. Contrast. Where do you see contrast? Yeah, so we've got contrasting color. You have blue and orange, which are opposites. You've got the contrast between the colored parts of the image and the parts of the image that have no color and are just black and white. Good. What's another one, Trin? Shape. So we're cutting out different shapes, putting them together. So shape's an element. So what do you see? What principle do you see that she's using when she's putting the shapes together into the whole image? What? Rhythm. Yes. So we're getting rhythm from all of these little pieces. Those are creating rhythm. Even the speech bubble, the shape of the tears, even the shape of the heads are repeating. Michelle? Line. There is line. So line's an element. So how is she using line to put the image together as one of the principles? Okay, so using the line to create movement, especially in these areas here and like this one around here. Good. So this next one, she kind of reminds me of like an I Spy book in collage form. So she says about her work, I create hand-cut collages from old illustrations and antique and decorative papers. I combine images of plants, insects, animals, planets, human anatomy, and various objects whose diverse sources range from the 1500s to the mid-1900s. So she is someone who collects lots of old images and cuts them out and puts them together. So this one of hers is called La Lune, or La Luna. So take a minute and look at that one. What materials do you notice? How are they used? And what principles do you notice? Okay, Zoe? Yep. So yes, so it has symmetrical balance. So any other principles that you notice? Zach? Pattern, definitely. So creating patterns by placing things in different order and repeating. So you're getting little patterns inside these circles. You're getting little patterns here. Cool. What materials are you noticing in this one? What is it made out of? So this one, it looks like it's all cut images. So I don't see any drawing or any things on this one where they've painted paper or cut out their own images. But I think the interesting thing about her work is she is not trying to cut out pictures to create like a scene or a bigger image. She's cutting out those images and then using them to create that pattern and create that arrangement. It doesn't feel like I'm looking at a space with a foreground, middle ground, background that tells a story in that sense. Anything else that you notice about it? It is earthy because she's choosing a lot of those organic shapes and colors. Right?
I was going to say color.
Uh-huh.
Because of the many dark and light colors, it makes me look at the whole entire painting instead of taking the lines.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Isn't it like unity?
Yes. Unity is super important in this piece. Otherwise, it would look like a big old hot mess. So what is she doing to make this look organized and like things belong and not like it's just a pile of junk on a paper? Zach? What? Yes. So filling small spaces, making the spaces look intentional. So, and being consistent with the amount of space. It doesn't feel like there are big gaps in places that should be filled. Some areas are filled more tightly than others, but it's consistent, and it sort of creates this negative space and line that we can follow around the piece. Would this artwork have worked if they had put it on an image as the background? No, it needs that white background to balance the busyness of the image. That's something to think about when you're planning your collage too. Yes,
Would
yes.
this one be like also like a texture?
Yeah, definitely texture. And so this one's texture comes from the texture of the images. Sometimes your texture will come from the literal physical texture of the paper. All right. This one I chose because it's very different in the sense that she isn't trying to create a recognizable image. So it's completely abstract. She's just trying to visually put something together into a pleasing and create a feeling with it rather than a place or a thing. So we're going to listen to this clip of her talking about her work and her process.
My name is Sochi Solis. I am a visual artist and a DJ out of Austin, Texas. I was born and raised here. My grandfather on my mother's side immigrated here when he was 4 from Guanajuato. They moved straight to Austin, and their first home was in West Austin in Clarksville. And then my mother grew up on Rainey Street when I was born here and stayed. And my family's still here. So I really get a lot of inspiration from nature, the natural world. And then as I've developed older, obviously the cultural world, since I include found images from printed media. But my first love was just basic, simple, repeated shapes that are found in nature. So I'm really attracted to, maybe borderline obsessed with this sort of ovid, oval shape and that repeated layering of that same shape. And it's the same shape you see in stones, pebbles, people's faces, it just really it's repeated, and it just becomes this curious linear journey. What else has this shape, and why does it have this shape, and why am I so drawn to it as a creature on the planet? And I'm really fascinated with nature, mostly because, my childhood was being outside had such a huge impact on me. And my mother had a big plot of, we had half an acre that was mostly a farm, and it was certified organic. My name, Xochi, is a Nahuatl Aztec word for flower. So when I meet other Chicanos, they're like, oh, your parents must have been hippies. Because it's that movement, that Chicano movement of the 70s that was really going back to La Raza, the roots, of who you are and your origin stories. I cannot draw. I do very poor illustrations. For me, and the entryway into, makes a lot of sense using collage as a medium, is I was a collector. I collected things all the time. I have little collections of, natural elements like stones and interesting sticks. And then also I was really interested in the printed medium from a very early age. And I think that had a lot to do with my mother always having paper, back in the day of graphic designers, you had paper sample books and type books, and you had all of these books that had information for you to use to make something else. And I think having that, visual media around me all the time kind of, subconsciously entered into my practice. Yeah, I've collected things and also started collecting records at a very young age. I've only been a DJ for a couple of years, but I've been a record collector for 2 decades. So I've never really been the artist that draws or puts my intentions for future works in a journal or a sketchbook. It's always just about amassing material and then physically calling through it as an extension of my body. So I started DJing a little over 2 years ago, and the entry point for that was a collective that was around a year before I joined it called Chulita Vinyl Club. So I only spin vinyl in our chapter, our crew only spins vinyl, and it was really rooted in this idea of having an empowering space to learn how to DJ, and largely it's for, as the name is Chulita, which means little cutie. It's for women only or women identifying and non-binary folks. So we nerd out about all kinds of things. People are like, oh, Texas, they think like Austin's the coolest place. Houston's huge, has huge immigrant population that makes it super diverse and really interesting and kind of a lot more cutting edge than Austin in a lot of ways. San Antonio, which is only like 90 minutes away from here, historically has such a much longer history than the city of Austin. When people come in to visit as tourists, they're coming to the center of Austin and really taking that away as their experience of what the city has to offer. But you'll look around, that's where the condos and the higher priced living is. And most people that are of color can't afford that. And also very strategically, the real estate and the redlining of the city also impacted like who you get to see if you're coming to the areas of attraction in the city of Austin and who you don't want to see when you come in. There are tons of folks here in Austin that are of color, that are doing marches, that are physically inhabiting spaces that maybe, are perceived as very white, and it's uncomfortable. It's not easy. So, but you just have to keep doing it because the alternative is like, are you gonna leave? Are you gonna move? It's an incredible amount of work, I think, emotionally exhausting. And I think, that has been touched on in a lot of different cities that are going through similar growing pains. It's like to resist being moved away from spaces, but to continue to go to those spaces is sometimes having to explain to people like being the exotic thing in the room, and it's just uncomfortable, like culturally, like if you're not the dominant culture, you just have to sort of code switch or do things in order to kind of navigate that space. But I think ultimately, like there's a lot of communities here that are not going anywhere. And I think the thing that is making it easier for us is the fact that we're, bonding together in a lot of collectives or collaborating on projects where we may not have the finances to throw a big event in a club or something, but if we pull our resources together, things like that. I think when people say like Austin is weird, it's, like a branding statement, obviously, but I think it's really great for travelers to think about it like Austin in that context, because they're sort of motivated to find the strange and curious things about the city, and to look for things that might be off or weird or different. And I think that that's like at the heart of anybody's excellent travel experiences, is that they're able to like open up their lens wider to see something and experience something new and maybe strange.
Okay, so looking at this piece of hers called A Usable Past, what materials do you notice? How are they used? What principles do you notice? So texture is an element. So how is she using texture to put things together to create one of the principles? What is texture doing? Is the textures creating contrast? Are they creating unity? Are they creating balance? Are they creating emphasis on a focal point? Somebody help her out. What is the texture doing? You should see lots of people looking in their notes if they don't have an answer. So look at your examples. Which one of those principles is the texture creating? Yasmin, did you find one? Contrast. Yes. So we have these areas that are really smooth and flat. And then the areas where we have this implied texture from the images, we probably couldn't touch that and feel something, but because it's a picture or a photograph or something from a magazine or a book, it's creating that appearance of texture and creating the contrast of that image. Good. What other principles are you seeing in this one? Michelle? So color is an element. So what principle is color creating? How's she combining colors? Austin, can you help her out? What principle is color creating in this one? What? Look at your notes, see if you can figure it out. Ray. Emphasis. Yes, there's more than just emphasis, but that super intense bright orange is drawing our eye into that spot. You could argue that it's also creating contrast because we have this really desaturated gray with that really intense saturated orange. We also have unity because she's repeating that orange and that gray down here to make that look like it belongs together. Okay. And our next one we're going to look at is an artist called Trenton Doyle Hancock. And he is talking to you about a piece called The Former and the Latter, or The Ascension and Ascension. And he's going to kind of talk about his process and the way he collects things, which is really interesting. Xochitl also talked about that idea of being a collector, and rather than sketching something, you're sort of going through your hoard and finding what you want to use, and that process of coming up with an idea.
This is just a really small example of what my floor looks like in the studio. So I just literally swept up a few things and thought it'd be nice to contextualize these with the works that are up on the wall. Just in the studio in general, I don't usually waste this. So I let the material accumulate, and I want you to see the history of everything. So the idea of erasure only happens with a knife. Like I cut back into material to breathe new life into it, or to subtract it. I'm really happy this stayed intact in the letter E that was inside of the former and latter's painting. It was in his pants area. The of that. I guess I could have been a little bit more reckless when I was cutting it out, but part of me was like, no, if you cut it in a way that it maintains its integrity, then I can use this again in some other work. always going out and gathering different kinds of textures and materials to keep things from being so stagnant or inbred. But that work has probably 15 years worth of collage material in it, so it's kind of fun for me to go up and say, oh, that's from undergrad. Oh, I remember I did that in grad school. This is one of the first mounds I made that I decided to cut up and put in here, so it's like a little time capsule that unfolds. And the challenge was to orchestrate it in such a way that it didn't feel overwhelming. It just felt like it was unfolding in a way that was natural. And it's about busting maybe out of shackles and trying to get free of something. So this painting, in a way, has every move that I've ever made in a painting in one painting. I've done all these smaller works that had figures in them, but they weren't interacting with anything. There were these invisible forces binding them, but there were these kind of tortured characters. And with this work, I wanted to kind of keep that idea of torture. Like, okay, this character is in a predicament that doesn't seem comfortable, but I wanted to give him some sort of agency that maybe he could get out of it, or he's on his way out. This painting was fully kind of orchestrated in a different way than some of the other ones, where I had to kind of feel through them. I could show you the sketch that I did before this painting. It was literally 6 or 7 marks on a white sheet of paper. Like I knew what this painting was going to be from there. So there were no false starts when I went to work on it. Just calculated subtraction. So all of these other works went from birth all the way up to maturity, and that painting just sat in the corner and was like, hey, you gonna work on it? It's been 2 months. You gonna do something? I was like, hey, I got this. I got this little sketch. I know what you're gonna be. There's lots of things in the work that play off of one another. There's the very organic, softer edged material, and then there's that very hard edged ladder in the middle that anchors it all. The pencil for me is this symbol. It's like a weapon. No regrets on the eraser. That is just my little pun or joke. But it's also about my life. Like I do have regrets. I think everyone has regrets, even if they don't admit to it. But artistically, I don't. I think everything happens in the way that it should in terms of art.
Okay. So in that one, the materials, what did you notice that he was using and incorporating into the piece? Zach? Everything. So he was, he had that little bit of a plan about what the composition was going to look like, and playing with all of those different textures and layers, repurposing old artworks, random stuff that he found. Anything else that stood out specifically that he was using? Yeah. So incorporating some 3D materials like the laces, the bottle caps. There was one technique that he used that I didn't notice in the other artists, which is why I kind of highlighted him. And that was subtraction. So using cutting as part of creating the piece in terms of removing space so that you could see what was underneath, and building up those layers and putting something down, but then maybe removing part of it and leaving part of it behind. And then the scrap becomes more source material to make something else, which is really interesting. Okay, so what we're going to do is experiment with some different collage techniques. You're going to experiment and make just like a little, couple inch by couple inch thumbnail in your sketchbook to try them out. And while you're doing that, you're going to be thinking about the plan for what you want to do on your sketchbook cover. So we'll go through and get your techniques blocked in, and then tomorrow we'll practice actually using materials to kind of play with the techniques, and then move into actually creating your cover. So I have some materials that you're going to be able to use, but you're also welcome to bring in your own source material as well. If you have things that you're like, ooh, my hoard has been waiting for this collage assignment, then start bringing some of those things in so you can use them. Okay. So these 3 techniques you're going to want to add into your sketchbook note page. So go ahead and do that. So you'll want to give yourself some space around them so that you can practice that technique in a small sort of thumbnail next to it or underneath it. So the first one is mixed media or hybridity is another word for that. So art made from more than one material. So we saw that in the first artist who was using the pastels and the drawing materials, creating painted paper and then cutting it out, using images from different sources, books, magazines. We saw that in the last artist using 3D objects or repurposing old artworks and cutting them out and putting them back together in a new way. So juxtaposition is combining images to create new meaning. So the best example of that one is probably the first artist that had the faces and the tears. So by putting things together, I'm changing the meaning of them. And then layering, you're overlapping and covering images. So all of those artists, well, no, I lied. The second artist didn't really use layering because all of her pieces were laid out flat on that space. Nothing was really overlapping. But in the other 3, they were definitely overlapping and layering up images, especially Xochi with all of those circles of different materials and different textures. And then sometimes those layers are cut into to reveal what's underneath. And I will go back to these if you need to. So fragments is a way that you can use to create that juxtaposition of the way you're putting things together. I can create new meaning because I'm combining images in a unique way, or putting things together that don't normally go together to create new meaning. Alex, will you shut that? And then your last technique is using pieces to create larger spaces or larger images. So you're not cutting out the picture of the face, you're using lots of little pieces to assemble together into the face. This one is also an example of the mixed media because it's drawn on top of with the Sharpie. So assembling from small pieces is your last technique. So you have 4. So starting tomorrow we will start making your mini collages in your sketchbook and then move into creating your sketchbook covers.